Even Netflix is competing with creators and influencers and platforms because they all want one finite resource, which is time.
Marketing hasn't just changed formats, it has changed expectations. Brands are no longer competing only with ads, they are competing with entertainment itself. So how do brands earn attention without losing what they are actually trying to sell? Welcome to the DesignRush podcast. I'm your host, Kia Johnson. Today, I'm joined by Andy Willers, co-founder of Favorite, a performance marketing agency helping brands turn creative content into measurable growth. We talk about why brands are starting to behave more like creators, why viral moments don't always translate into revenue, and how entertainment and value need to work together for marketing to perform. If you're trying to understand what attention really means for brands today, this conversation is for you. Subscribe and let's start the discussion. Andy, welcome to the show. I'm looking so forward to actually getting stuck into this conversation. There's a lot to unpack around how brands are actually earning attention today. So I would like us to take a look at, if marketing has now shifted from advertising to entertainment, do you feel that the brands are basically just adapting to social media, or what exactly is at play here?
When it comes to entertainment, you got to think it's not so much a clean shift what's happened over the last decade or more. I think it's more of a forced evolution. And I think the platforms that came along, things like TikTok and Instagram, ultimately they're entertainment first environments. And that's what people want when they're on these platforms. They want to be entertained and they don't want to be sold to. So I think brands have had to change their approach. It's not an ad spot on TV where they've got 30 seconds to sell a proposition because people are forced to sit there and watch it in between a program they're watching. Suddenly they've had to change their kind of whole approach because you're competing for attention. And ultimately you've got to think of the mindset that these people are in. They're here to be entertained by scrolling through TikTok, not watch an ad for your product and be like, hey, 30% off, whatever. And I think that kind of nuance, the way that people have had to try and tell their story slightly differently and capture attention, it's that forced evolutionary side of things which I think is changing the landscape of traditional marketing to be one more aligned with the native content on the platforms. And yeah, I for one welcome it. There's something powerful about a piece of sales collateral that can also give something back and reward you for watching it and not just feel like you're being influenced.
I'm actually now wondering, brands itself then, are they then expected to behave more like creators than actual advertisers? And I would say, in essence, there's even maybe a balance between the two where, how do you find that balance? How do you achieve it? How do you maintain it? And thereby just also being able to, to keep that clientele interested all the time is what I would like to find out from you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think brands have had to change the way they communicate with people purely because they've got so many more touch points that people can interact with them with. And I think absolutely, yes, brands have had to become more like creators than advertisers because the brands that are winning these days on social actually have a personality. It's not just a faceless corporation. They need to have a voice. They need to have a sense of humor. They need to have opinions. They even need to show off their flaws. No one's perfect. And I think if you try and portray yourself as this, shining knight in advertising armor, you're gonna struggle basically. So I think the way that brands have had to evolve their personalities and the touch points that they have with their consumers has naturally evolved with the platforms that people can sort of consume their content on. And I think that you see it in the way that certain brands have leveraged actually their internal employees to be faces of the brand and humanize the brands a bit more. And actually they're using kind of almost internal creators to try and give them a human face rather than standing behind a logo or the branded elements that really hammer home what the brands used to be. Even things like the most recognizable brands like Coca-Cola, you look at their logo, you instantly recognize it. The newer brands that are winning, brands like, you must have seen Duolingo's TikTok and all that kind of stuff. They're acting like a person, and they're doing trending stuff. And I think it's about that kind of trust element, especially when you're talking to those younger audiences consuming content in the way that they've understood and have evolved into embracing, essentially. There's a real lack of trust around advertising. People have been advertised to for decades, and I think they're becoming very aware when they're being sold to, and actually they want to feel like when they're interacting with a brand, they're not being sold to, but actually they're getting value. Traditional ads generally ask something of you, whether it's your attention or your money or your time or something like that. But essentially, when a brand makes good content, it also gives something back. And I think that's when brands can win with their content production techniques by emulating, the people that these, the people who are consuming content on these platforms actually want to interact with.
Now, I hear you on companies and brands, utilizing, the internal staff and actually having them be these internal creators, for lack of a better word, to, promote the brand in a way that seems more authentic and more real. And so people start feeling like there is something that I can engage with. There is something that I completely and 100% trust, more as, we were saying earlier about the traditional ads themselves. But now, do you think there's going to come a point where that gets abused in a way where it's like we're overdoing this too much, where we're using internal staff way too much? And then also begs the question, when you start with a company, is that going to be an expectation that is going to be expected of you as a staff member?
Hey, you're great at your job, but how good are you on camera? Because we need you to be the face of this company.
But exactly. And so, I mean, I think there's a little bit of a danger zone or risk area. I shouldn't say the word danger zone, but you know what I mean, like risk area.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Where I'd be curious to see what's going to happen in the next couple of years. Is this going to become another saturated part of the industry, or is it something that's going to be embraced and just be constantly evolving all the time?
Yeah, I think consumers are smart, right? They know what an ad is, and I think they can see through someone trying to be authentic, but actually, if you just peel back a couple of surface layers, it's all a charade and an act, basically. And I think brands they should be wise not to assume that people can't see through their kind of spiel or act. So I think I'd bring it back to what a good content strategy in 2026 looks like. You need to be providing value back to your consumer. If you want them to interact with you, if you want them to enjoy and embrace your content, I don't think it's got to be structured like, one of your employees talking about how good your product or platform or service is, and, maybe jumping on a trend that feels like it's a bit disingenuous to the brand. You're just doing a TikTok dance because that's what's trending at the moment. You've got to actually think about it and go, how could we as a brand either utilize the human faces that we have at our company in the right way that makes it feel truly authentic and actually is authentic, or going back to Duolingo, how do we leverage the brand assets that we have? They turned their mascot into the living, breathing face of the brand, and that's how they got around providing value back to their consumers. And I think there's something to be learned there. It's about doing it in the right way. You're doing it in the right way that attracts attention, but you always hear about brands and they get like a viral hit and all that kind of stuff. Viral's great. It's like a spark, but if you don't have a plan on how to capitalize on that spark or repeat that spark, then you kind of fade away very quickly. So another one, it's a couple of years old as a reference, but Ryanair's TikTok channel, they struck gold. They did it again, and it works multiple times in the formats that they found worked really well with their audiences. So it's about giving back, trying to do the authentic thing in the right way, but building a community around your content and not just a bunch of consumers, I think.
Can you imagine being the brand? And I guess this is where everybody is sitting at, in terms of just, organizations and companies and brands and just like getting ahead, is how about being that 5 steps ahead, and how about coming up with something completely new that is actually the trend that everyone else is following, which it doesn't necessarily have to be, that everyone else is following, but that you build a community around. And so there's something to be said about having that uniqueness to your own brand and knowing when to say yes and when to say no.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. I think ultimately trending stuff the word trending just means culturally relevant at this moment, right? It's something that's captured culture's attention and it's happening now. And I think to be a culturally relevant brand, you got to kind of do three things. You have to have a point of view. You can't be bland. You have to stick your stake in the ground and say, this is where we stand on this thing. And I'm not saying be political or, like weigh in on current affairs, but you got to have a point of view and that gives you a personality, essentially. I think the second important thing is they have to be able to move at the speed that culture moves, right? So to be really part of the conversation, you can't be planning 6 months ahead and sticking to a content calendar and not being able to get stuff out on social because it has to go through 4 layers of sign off, because you're just not going to be able to move quickly enough and you're not going to be able to be part of the conversation. The conversation will have moved on by the time you made the piece of content. Yeah. And I think that the third thing is, to your point about how do they become, how do they start the trend? Again, it's about giving back to the community more than they take. Yes, they're a brand. Yes, they have some commercial motivation from their consumers, but it's about being part of that conversation and giving their consumers something back, a laugh, a smile, being part of a joke, making them feel part of a community, all that kind of stuff. And that's when I think people will start to build that fond connection with the brand and how they can really engage with it emotively.
So I've actually got a question for you. If you were to compare the B2B space with the B2C space, would there be a difference in what we are currently discussing? If you're looking at jumping on this train, I feel like there's an overlap between the two, and that there is obviously space for it being completely different when you're catering within the B2B space, as opposed to obviously the B2C. But there is this merge as well at the same time, right?
Yeah, I think obviously B2B are still talking to people and people like content. A B2B sales approach is still talking to a real human being who's got to engage with your product or service and buy it at the end of the day. And just because you are a B2B buyer, it still means you have a sense of humor. It still means you want to be part of the conversation. It's just a different niche that you're talking to, actually. So I think B2B creative and production can learn a lot from the way that B2C brands are doing it. I just think it's about maybe understanding your niche a bit better. Like, say you have a product and it appeals to a very specific niche of a B2B buyer, and hey, there's only 10,000 of these people in the UK or the US or whatever. That's great. You've almost got a micro community there. How can you build on the fact that all the 10,000 people that you're trying to speak to share something in common, and actually you're the people who can bring to light their kind of day-to-day struggles in a fun way, or be the source of enjoyment that they can find out of their job, and not just another, hey, save 20% on your overheads and get this thing and AI whatever, and it's going to help you. I think you can learn a lot as a B2B brand from the way that B2C brands do it and engage. And like I say, I keep going back to it. The content should give back as much as it demands from people. Yeah, the value, you want a sale, right? You want someone to open their wallet and give you their hard-earned cash, but maybe you need to build a connection with them first by speaking to them on their level or engaging them in a way that it sticks in your mind beyond just a traditional B2B ad, I think.
So I'm curious, Andy, brands at the moment, if you were to take a step back, do you feel that brands are now then competing with your Netflixes, your creators, and your influencers for attention? Or do you think it's just a natural sort of progression to move into the space itself and become those things?
I think they're all competing, right? So even Netflix is competing with creators and influencers and platforms because they all want one finite resource, which is time. People have only got so much time, right? If you're Netflix, your financial standing relies on how many minutes people view your content for. And if people are spending more time on TikTok watching content creators, that's a threat to the Netflix model, right? So it's the same for any brand who wants to play the content game and try and vie for attention, because people only have 24 hours in a day, and they're only of that 24 hours actually consuming content for a much smaller portion. So you got to provide them something that they want to feel like it's worth their time getting into. And if that's, a conversion focused ad that then demands their time, go to a website and buy something, if that works, great. But it's also, if that's a piece of content, like I say, that makes them smile, a joke, a laugh, something that's thought-provoking or triggers a conversation, it's still demanding their time. So they're all competing against each other, really, because content creators want your views, and Netflix wants your views, and Duolingo wants your views, and, all that kind of stuff. So they're all competing for the same thing, really. And then ultimately, if you can capitalize properly on the time and foster a connection which results in a conversion event, i.e. they sign up for your service or they buy your products and stuff, then you get out the secondary metric there, which is revenue, I think.
We unpacking this a little bit right now, and you've spoken to a couple of these points, but in terms of entertainment-driven marketing, you were mentioning, yes, building that real brand loyalty, but is there the risk of it just being also short-term attention? I guess it would you would need to be quite specific in the way that you're doing it, but in the same breath, you need to just jump on the bandwagon, because you can't also go through all this red tape in order to make something happen or jump on a trend or whatever the case may be. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, I think I bring it back to that viral moment. Like, if you can trigger a viral moment, it's a spark, but it's not a long-term strategy. So if you jump on a trend and you get millions of views and it hits the right zeitgeist of that moment, that's great. But a million views or 100 million views doesn't always equal conversions. And I think if you don't have a plan to capitalize on the 100 million views, then actually that moment will come and go. I think the successful brands either have the capabilities capabilities isn't the right word. They have the right setup to capitalize on that attention. They've got the right automated email flows for people who check out or whatever. They've got the ability to continue that conversation off social, or they have the ability to understand how that moment came about, reverse engineer it, and then figure out how to do it again. So, the companies that keep going viral, like the ones that I always see is the mouse phone case videos where he's like jumping off a dam or he's outside the Apple store. Like, they do the same thing in every video, but actually, because they do it slightly more extreme every time, I kind of watch the ad and I'm like, maybe I should get a mouse case. So what they've figured out is, hey, they hit on a good recipe for a kind of viral piece of creative, and they've managed to repeat it multiple times and use it as an ad. So I think you have to have a strategy. Like I say, virality is that trigger moment, the spark. The strategy around it is how you capitalize on it.
That's so true. And you're chatting a bit about what those views and what that viral moment would translate into, because we are looking for revenue here. This is the ultimate end game, so to speak. Oh gosh, I feel like I'm referencing, what is this, Thanos or something from the Marvel comics.
Flick everyone out of existence. Yeah.
So it's yes, it's fantastic, and obviously getting attention to brand is one thing, because creating brand awareness is also very important. That it's a very important component of your organization. But I think sometimes we lean too heavily on the fact that these views are automatically going to get me the revenue that I want, because there's also the demographic. Where exactly did it reach to? Who are the people that you're reaching to? Are those the people that are going to be spending the money? Or are these people just is it just the entertainment factor for now? Strategy. That's basically where it all ends up in. You do need to have that strategy. So I'm also wanting to find out from you then, is it that brands could also then get so much focused on entertainment that they actually forget what it is they're selling?
Yeah, and I think you see it fairly regularly in brands who don't have a clear strategy in how to harness trends. Like we mentioned earlier, I think a brand can't just jump on a trend just because it's trending. It has to fit in a relevant perspective with their brand and how their brand fits into it. Because, let's say you do something and it goes viral, people have to remember what your brand is at the end of that video. If it's just a dance and you take your logo off it or whatever, if they don't realize what the brand was or what you were selling at the end of that video, then what's the point in a viral piece of content? So I think if you focus too much on entertainment and then you lose the core elements of what your brand is, then you will not capitalize on the success of that video. So, if you're making a comedy sketch, make it relevant to your brand. If you're making a piece of viral content that's very trend driven, how can you actually do it in a way that people take something away about the brand and not just the trend, basically? So I think, if you're just focusing on virality, sure, I'm sure you could try and engineer a viral video, but can you engineer a viral video that leaves someone with a lasting impression of your brand? That's probably the key question you have to ask yourself.
Looking ahead over the next few years, will the winning brands actually be the ones that are entertaining the best, or the ones that are actually communicating that value most clearly? You spoke a lot about value. And so is this then something, it's like a non-negotiable for you? Value, value, value.
I'm not saying it's a non-negotiable. When you ask the question, what's going to be the winning formula? The brands who favor entertainment, the brands who favor value proposition communication. I think ultimately it's both, right? The winners will be the brands who do both simultaneously. So it's almost like entertainment can be the delivery mechanism for value communication, but then if you can't communicate the value post that, or you can't capitalize on the views that the entertainment brings, then you're not going to convert that attention into ultimate company value, which is revenue, right? So it's almost like entertainment can be the first click, i.e. getting people in the door, but your ongoing strategy and how you convert those people are actually going to get them from in the door to staying in the room. So you've got to make sure that you've got the right email flows, the right landing pages, the right ongoing social strategy, and you got to balance entertainment and providing people with content value to actually working out how to capitalize on that and turn them into true customers that are going to give you value as a company.
I mean, behind every business, there are human beings. And so if you, for example, are selling a specific product and you're very passionate about that product, I think that it would be something that would translate very easily in you being able to reach your audience the right way. Whether it is through an entertainment style or just like touching on some key hard points, and just make sure you always have that heart and soul. And then, it'll be an automatic, I think, for the revenue
it's why, often founder-led content performs very well, right? When we bring it back to it, when people are being influenced by an ad, they don't want to just feel like they're being influenced to take a decision. And I think more and more so people can see through an ad tactic.
Yes.
But founder-led content, let's take it as an example, if they can see that someone is genuinely passionate about something or genuinely has worked hard to find a solution or has shared the same frustrations as them and found a way to overcome it, it doesn't have to be viral. That's just a great sales tactic. You're going to instantly resonate with someone who you can identify with and has real passion. So it's still people selling to people, but I think, there's elements in entertainment, there's elements in value-led advertising, there's elements in conversion-focused stuff. All of them have their place. It's just finding the right moment for each and making sure that you can activate a proper, full strategy that encompasses all of those elements.
Definitely. Andy, thank you so much for joining us on the DesignRush podcast today. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Looking very forward to seeing where the next couple of years will be taking you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Curious about what top brands look for choosing an agency? Tune into our latest episodes where we reveal the decision-making secrets of leading brands. Subscribe to the DesignRush podcast and stay ahead of the competition.